Thank you very much for making a date on the marketplace. Welcome back. The stock of loans that are not being paid back reached 8.7 billion cedis ending June this year. This was contained in the latest Bank of Ghana report on developments in the banking sector. So what would be the impact of this development on access and cost of credit for businesses? George Rafi has more.
8.74 billion cedis loans that have not been settled by borrowers is part of the total 38.7 billion cedis credit that were given out by banks up until the end of June this year. The data showed since April 2018 to June, stock of non-performing loans went up by 11 million Ghana cedis to 8.74 billion cedis. However, the Bank of Ghana maintains the rate of growth in these loans that commercial banks fear would not be paid back have slowed compared to the same period for last year. Private sector accounted for about 90% of the loans, with public sector taking up the rest. Majority of these loans went to businesses operating in commerce and finance sectors. However, some of these contractors have told Joy Business most of these loans that they took from these banks were to finance projects on behalf of government. Some of these banks that were recently liquidated by Bank of Ghana have told Joy Business if these loans were settled by government, it could have improved their financial position, which could have prevented them from losing their licenses. The development has also affected the ability of these banks to grant fresh loans. It has also impacted on the cost of credit. The regulator has also maintained that the development remains the biggest threat to the stability of the banking sector.
All right, so let's get some further explanation to this particular development, and I've been joined by in-house analyst Philip Namfuri for some more details. Now, Philip, you're welcome to the market.
Thank you very much.
Now, quickly give us an overview of the report and some highlights.
Okay, so essentially this banking sector report is released after the Monetary Policy Committee meetings, and we know the Monetary Policy Committee meetings are held on a bi-monthly basis. That's every 2 months. So after the MPC sits, they meet, they come out with this banking sector report, which feeds into the decisions when they're taking the Monetary Policy Committee decisions. And this report covers 34 banks as at June 2018. We know right now we have 30 banks as at August 2018 because of the knockout of a number of local banks. And the breakdown is 17 domestic banks, or 17 domestic controlled and 17 foreign controlled banks. So that's essentially what the banking sector report is supposed to do. And Bank of Ghana does this to ensure accountability in the system and to give us some information on what goes on in the banking sector.
All right, so before we even go into NPLs, give us a snapshot of what the other banks are faring or how they are faring.
Okay, so because they've aggregated the banks, there are no bank-specific indications in there. Like maybe, for example, this bank is doing this bank is doing that. So they put it all together, and they look at what we call key financial soundness indicators, FSIs. And what are these financial soundness indicators? For example, things such as solvency, the bank's liquidity position, its capital adequacy ratio, and stuff like that are all highlighted in this report. It's about 17 pages worth of charts, numbers, explanations on different happenings in the banking sector over a period up to June 2018. It's normally over 1 year. So from June 2017 to June 2018.
Now we hear the banks are shifting their incomes into other areas. What can you tell us about this?
Okay, so essentially, in banking practice, this is what we call risk diversification. They're not doing too well in lending to you and I because we're not paying back, and it's increasing the NPLs. I'm sure we'll get to NPLs in our discussion. Yes. So what they're doing is that they're putting their money into investments, government securities, T-bills, bonds, stuff like that, because these are going to quickly give them back their money, and these are less risky investments. Obviously, they always say that government will always pay you back, and we've seen that in some jurisdictions it's not the case, but that's not a time for this discussion. Essentially, they want to shift away from lending to less risky investments to make more money for themselves.
Where less risky investments include what?
Include treasury bills. So you see banks buy 91-day, 182-day, but now from the report we've realized that banks are shifting towards long-term. You know, there was a preponderance of short-term investments. Back in the days when inflation was spiraling out of control. Now that inflation is easing, even from the report, you can see that banks are shifting to long-term, because what happens is that if you are going to do long-term, then you want inflation to hold, because it's going to erode the gains you're going to make on these investments. And now that inflation is steady, single digits thereabout, banks are shifting funds into longer-term securities and moving away from lending, which is going to affect you and I. But at the same time, the NPLs also is the reason why they are moving away from lending to these investments.
All right, so let's come to the NPLs
Very
proper.
good.
You know, in the reports, which I believe you heard, the level has gone up significantly. What can you tell us about the numbers?
Okay, so I have some numbers in front of me here. This is from the report, and it says the NPL ratio fell to 22.6% in June 2018. And the last time they reported was in April, and that time the ratio was 23.5%. You can see it's just a marginal drop. But if you compare it from last year, 2017, it's also marginal. Last year, 2017, the ratio was 21.2%. Now it's 22.6%. So you can see that it's gone up. But one good thing here is that the rate of growth of the non-performing loans has slowed. And that we can glean from the report. And it says here that the rate of growth has slowed down considerably to 9.7% as of June 2018 ending, compared with an annual growth of 30.7% last year. So last year it was growing at 30.7%, and now it's come down to 9.7%. And like you said in your introduction, 8.74 billion worth of non-performing loans that have gone bad and people are not paying back,
which is still high. I mean, when
very,
you compare
very high.
The general levels.
Yes.
Now, why is it so? I mean, what is accounting for the slight, decrease in the rates at which the NPLs are going up? Okay,
so from the report, very simply, we had this ESLA bond. That's one reason why. Banks are now getting their funds back. There's also been some reclassification of their loan portfolios. So maybe you had these loans as performing, suddenly you have to reclassify them, or you have to change some to performing or something of that sort. Then you have your rate of growth slowing, and also because they are reducing their rate of lending to you and I. So therefore, the stock of loans that would have gone bad if they were pumping out a lot of money to us will also reduce. So these are some of the reasons why the rate of growth has slowed. Now
tell us which sector specifically is contributing or are contributing to this particular rate, level of...
So three main sectors: commerce and finance, electricity, water and gas, and the services sector. But it will surprise you to know that these same sectors are where the chunk of the funds are going to. Yes, last year's reports, and I can even bet your bottom's dollar, last 2 years was the same, these two sectors. You wonder how the agriculture, forestry and fishing, mining and quarrying are going. They are also recording low amounts of credits, as in like loans going to them. But it will surprise you that the agriculture, forestry and fishing are also recording high non-performing loans. But then these three sectors I've mentioned, commerce and finance, electricity, water and gas and services, accounts for 55% of the non-performing loans in the system, which is too high. And it's surprising that these are the sectors that banks are focusing on because they generate quick returns. You lend for 1 year, 2 years, and it's not really their fault because it's the nature of deposits in our system. The deposits here are short-term. You can't expect them to commit our short-term funds to a long-term venture. And over the course of time, we need to balance these economic imbalances, if I can put it like that, or these structural rigidities.
All right, I think we'll end here, but definitely we'll come to you and again for some more updates. And in-house analyst Philip Namfuri bringing us up to speed with current development within the banking sector. The banking sector report, latest one, of course, indicating that non-performing loans, the rate of non-performing loans has slowed down marginally, with the total rate itself moving up to over $8 billion. Now, away from that, CEO of the Tourism Authority, Akwesi Agyemang, says it is difficult collecting the 1% tourism levy since more than 70% of all hotels in the country do not have computers. He was speaking in an interview with Odelia Ntiamwa.
What has happened to the digital collection?
No, the digital collection is ongoing. That contract, there was a tender. We got to a point where we've done the technical feasibility and everything. And there are several legs for which it has to stand on. One was the building of a portal first. And we agreed that, okay, we are going to use the Visit Ghana portal as the marketing leg of that single window opportunity. The second leg was, once we have the marketing portal or the portal ready, how do we connect the various establishments? But with most IT projects, because technology is traveling at such a incredible speed, a year ago, what we intended to deploy has become, as it were, even obsolete now, because there's new technology which is even cheaper than what we intended to. So we keep revising how we plug in, because there has to be a lot of stakeholder education. You want a hotel, for example, to plug their whole booking system to your back end here. It's not easy. They have to understand that their data, one, is protected, data security and all those things. So how do we ensure? So we're looking at the systems that our partners are bringing in and how we can tighten it up. So what we've done in the interim is look at the low-hanging fruits. So the call center was part of the digital plan. The website was part of the digital plan. We've done those. We're currently at a stage where there have been revisions. We just had a meeting on it, and by the end of the month, we'll have a revised roadmap on how we engage. Now, the new plan is that there are when we did a survey across the country, and we went and interviewed about 1,462 establishments, which is like 50% of the accommodation facilities we have. And the feedback and what we saw was that almost 70% of them were very manual.
It's all live on the marketplace with me, Emmanuel Abuaji Riafi. Moving on to other developments, President Akufo-Addo says the $2 billion Sino-Hydro transaction will allow Ghana to have access to a large sum of money which will not burden its debt profile. Addressing Chinese government officials during his visit to China, he explained that Ghana is looking at this transaction to afford the opportunity to expand and improve road infrastructure as well as the railway development of the country.
Very determined on this Sino-Hydro arrangement, and we're counting on you in the way in which you worked with Bowie Dam, with the high quality work, that will also be a feature of the arrangements that we're making with Sino-Hydro. And therefore, Ghana too is very keen on providing as much support as possible to make the Sino-Hydro arrangement come on stream quickly. My understanding is that the agreement that was signed this morning with the Sino-Shore agreement, with the signing of the agreements this afternoon that we're going to do here, will complete virtually the entire group of documentation that was required to get the Sino-Hydro transaction on the way. There's great expectation in Ghana about the benefits of the Sino-Hydro transaction. So it is my hope and expectation that when we conclude the signing this afternoon, the way will be open for the Sino-Hydro to get on site in Ghana and begin the process of delivery under the agreement. A lot of trust has been built between Ghana and Power China, and so, but the $2 billion transaction, which is involved in the Sino-Hydro transaction, we're looking to increase it even more. And that's why I'm saying that as president, I'm expecting that we'll have even more than before. I'm satisfied about the capacity to do it, and we will have all the support that you need from the government of Ghana.
So the president, who has been in China to try to get some investment opportunities for Ghana, has already signed 8 cooperation agreements and memoranda of understanding in different sectors of their respective economies. President Akufo-Addo has also hinted of plans to float a $50 billion century bond, said to be the biggest ever bond the country is going for. This, he said, will provide resources to finance our infrastructure and industrial development, and noted that at some stage China will interest itself and take a part of it as her contribution to Ghana's development. These are really interesting developments, but not without some related questions to be answered. And with me to do just that is Sino-Africa expert Paul Frimpong to tell us some more. Now, Paul, you're welcome to the marketplace.
Thank you.
So before we go into the specifics like the Sino-Hydro and the $50 billion and so on, what do you consider to be the level of interest that Ghana has taken in China and vice versa in recent times?
Yeah, definitely with this scenario, we're looking at the broader discussion happening around China and its role in Africa. For over the last 2-3 decades, we've seen a considerable amount of interest of China in Africa and vice versa. So for over a decade now, we've seen that China has risen to become the largest trading partner of Africa, surpassing the US and the European Union. In this respect, you know that China is relying on African economies for so many resources.
Exactly.
Likewise, African economies are also relying on China for physical evidence in terms of infrastructure development in certain sectors. So obviously we've seen that in the last couple of years, Ghana has also, raised its interest in China. Even the current administration, you've seen in the first step, we saw the vice president visiting China when they just came into power.
Exactly.
And this has followed with the current situation that we have at our hand, where we have the president in China. Actually, because of the FOCA, the Forum for China-African Cooperation, which is held every 3 years. So the forum itself started today. So today and then tomorrow, that's when the forum will happen. But then you realize that every economy represented by its government, its president, has their own agenda. Obviously, we've had a lot of debates about how Africa is positioning itself with respect to the agreements and the deals that they're having with China. Because here's the case, we have the example of the Western model that we followed, where we got to a point where most economies in Africa fell into debt, that they have to even go under HIPIC, which happened in Ghana in the 2000s, before we were forgiving the debt that we owe some of these economies.
You don't find anything worrying about the fact that we are kind of refocusing our attention on China apart from the Western world?
I don't see it as a challenge. Obviously, we are looking at where we can get the best deal from.
Okay.
It's established fact that we need partners to develop to transform our economies. Obviously, what these economies have achieved, the West and the East China have achieved is a tremendous thing that we can learn from.
Okay.
They have the resources in terms of monetary resources, they have the capacity in terms of technical support, technological transfer, and everything there that we can use to leapfrog from where we are to the next phase of our development. But of course, the question is, how do you deal with these superpowers?
Exactly.
I'm looking at your tiny economy. Here's the case. Most of these economies are going to China, 1.something billion people with your 28, 29 million people. Some of the economies are as small as 2 million people, 3 million people, and you are sitting at the table, and the next person sitting in front of you has 1.3 billion people to negotiate with you. So we have a little bit of challenges as to how economies will make sure they will not fall into the trap that they fell in some years ago when we're dealing with the West.
All right, so let's move on. We don't have much time, but I would like to look at the deal, the Sino-Hydro deal, which has been signed and for which the president made some interesting comments on. Now, are we getting the best of deals with this transaction?
Well, obviously, we've seen that China has their own rhetoric in terms of how they are dealing with African economy. So instead of, they are choosing the physical evidence approach, okay, to find and build relationship with economies in Africa. Obviously, it's a barter system. They are in for something, okay, whether it's a mining resource that you will give to them, concession that they will mine for a period to cater for the money that you own them. So their approach is very simple. They say that, okay, we are not going to interfere politically in the economy. They are not interested in these diplomatic, conversation. What they are interested in is the physical evidence, okay? So you need this road to be constructed. I'm going to construct this road for you, okay? So it's up to the government to make sure they have a plan as to what they want to do with the government of China. So, for example, I'm sure the One District, One Factory is such a major blueprint that if an economy has such a project, okay, you can put in front of your development partners. This will bring physical evidence, physical results, because then you're not sitting in front of them without having any vision, allow them to come and do anything in your economy.
Okay.
Guys, this is what we want for the next 10 years, for the next 15 years. So in order for us to do business with you, in order to trade with you, these are the areas we need to support, and that's where the hydropower deal falls under. So it's a whole blueprint that the government has, that, okay, this and what we want to do in the economy under One District, One Factory. So
and such blueprints definitely will involve, environmental,
definitely. Because of course we had a situation where the illegal mining issues happened in recent past, where it affected the surrounding communities with respect to water bodies and what have you. Obviously, I'm sure and I'm very positive that under some of these initiatives, like One District, One Factory, all these measures have been taken into consideration. Because if not, then you just open your arms wide. Okay, China is big, they can swallow you. So you need to make sure that, okay, this is what we want. Like we've seen, this is the next time we are approaching them, we have a blueprint. In the past, how we were dealing with the Western economies, we had no blueprint. So they come in, assess the economy and say, okay, this is what we want to do for you. But this time around, we have our own blueprint. I thought of that is just a bonus.
So we definitely will come again on this particular topic. But in 30 seconds, what do you think about the $50 billion bond, century bond that has been?
I'm thinking that it's very ambitious, of course, because I don't think we've ever dreamt of floating such a huge amount of bond, and it's a century bond, right? So for me, I don't anticipate it happening now. Obviously, the discussion will happen if in the next couple of years before something of that sort can happen. But we need to understand how the impact of such debts will have on the entire economy. Do we have the capacity to be able to pay for those bonds in the time that they are maturing? We need to have think deeper before we can float such a bond. So I'm sure it's going to be a long discussion before something of that sort can happen in the economy.
Thank you very much for your time, Paul Frimpong. And Paul Frimpong is a Sino-Africa expert. He's been talking about current developments between Ghana and China. Away from that, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, says it is looking forwarding a comprehensive policy on the use of mercury by small-scale miners to Parliament for consideration. Acting Executive Director of the EPA, John Puamang, spoke with Joy Business at the launch of the Minamata Initial Assessment Report here in Accra.
PA says it is working hard to forward an amendment on the law governing mercury management to Parliament by first quarter of next year. Currently, the law regulating mercury management in the country dates as far back as 1989 under the Ministry of Trade, which only constitutes the use and importation of mercury in small-scale mining. Meanwhile, there also exists a minerals and mining law which makes provision for small-scale miners to buy and use mercury for their operations. It is against this backdrop that Acting Executive Director of EPA, John Puamang, says a comprehensive policy on mercury management has become necessary.
We are making a recommendation in this report that we should revise the law, either amend the mercury law, and that is probably the easiest way to go, so that we can include provisions of the Minamata Convention on mercury, so that it will enable us to have a comprehensive policy and legal framework for managing mercury in the country. The whole process is now ready to start. So we are looking at doing all the preparatory work, so that by the last quarter of the year, starting from October, we'll start making all the preparatory work, so that if we can make it such that early next year, when we have the new parliament convening, these things can be ready to be submitted to them for consideration.
Mr. Puamang, however, noted that government should consider mercury management as it seeks to lift the ban on small-scale mining. He spoke with Joy Business at the launch of the Minamata Initial Assessment Report presented by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, here in Accra. The initial assessment was instituted by the Global Environment Facility to enable parties of the Minamata Convention, including Ghana, determine the national requirements and needs for ratification. Joel Eyim Dakwa is Program Officer at UNDP.
By 2020, Ghana has to meet the obligations of the Minamata Convention. And one of the key obligations is that by 2020, mercury-added products have to be phased out. Ghana has requested for an extension to 2025. So by 2025, all these mercury-added products like mercury in bulbs, phones, batteries, in the health sector like mercury thermometers and all that, the country will have no obligation, because we have signed on to it, than to find ways of making sure that our market has products that do not have mercury in its content.
The UNDP's development of Minamata Initial Assessment for Ghana project was commissioned last year. Bisma Kausa, Joy Business.
And so within the extractive industry, more international oil companies are said to have shown interest in acquiring oil blocks in Ghana as the government sets October 5, 2018 to launch the country's first ever licensing bidding round for 9 oil blocks in the Western Offshore Basin. This comes after the Petroleum Commission began a roadshow to attract prospective investors with the technical and financial competency to participate in the bidding round. But when do we expect the licenses to be awarded? And what is the objective behind Ghana moving away from direct negotiation model with exploration companies? And also, what will the process entail? We'll definitely bring to you details of this particular story with the questions answered in our subsequent bulletins. And on that note, we wrap up this afternoon's edition of The Marketplace. It's been great having you on board. My name is Emmanuel Abuaji. Have a good afternoon.